This is fascinating what just transpired there. But Miguel Estrada is described by many, and certainly many on the right. I mean, this is a thorn on the side of Republicans. It was a purely partisan filibuster, as described by most Republicans, that kept Miguel Estrada from becoming an appeals court federal justice. And yet now, here you have Lindsey Graham almost throwing that back in Elena Kagan's face, almost as if to say, we are not going to do to you what your Democratic colleagues. You notice he first had her establish herself as a Dem, and then he reminded her about what her Dem colleagues had done to Estrada, and then he had her say that Miguel Estrada is her friend, and then he asked her if he'd be competent enough to be an appeals court justice, to which she trumped him and said not only would he be a good appeals court justice, he'd be a good Supreme Court justice. This is a fascinating exchange. To what avail? To what avail? Let me bring in, do we have our guys in Washington ready to go? I don't know who I want to ask this of, but I don't know if you were as fascinated by it as I was. And Victoria Toensing, maybe to you, there were some good points there made by Lindsey Graham. What was he trying to say?
Well, if he was being a great trial attorney, and we were all sitting here anticipating where he was going, but we all knew he was going somewhere. As he started out, you could just tell it was the method of a trial lawyer doing cross-examination. It is a sticking point with those of us who are conservative and thought Miguel Estrada should have been on the bench, and that the Democrats went after him for he wasn't the right kind of Hispanic. Terrible reasons, and he's a brilliant man. And her stock just went up with me for that one question.
Was that purely?
Rick,
go ahead, John.
Rick, well, I guess I'm bound to mention, I was also in that section with Miguel and Elena. I was different alphabetically, so I didn't sit next to them. But I've known them both for a long time. And the person who wasn't mentioned in that exchange was Barack Obama, because Barack Obama said during John Roberts' testimony, you are qualified, clearly, but politically, I just don't think you're the person I want as Chief Justice. And I think it really illustrates two different models of how senators vote for and against Supreme Court justices. One is it sort of basic competence, and that's where we get the 90-0 confirmations, or is it like today, where basic competence is a given, but there's also political acceptability to each senator. And we've simply moved, and that's why it used to be 90-0 in these confirmations, and now the most anyone's going to ever get is in the 60s.
Hey, John. Point, set, match. Lindsey Graham. Point, set, match. Rick, part of what he was doing is there are some new members on this committee. Senator Franken is new to this committee. I don't think Senator Whitehouse was around in the days of the previous confirmation hearing we're talking about. But what he was trying to say is, look, we're not the ones who have started the politicization. Now, the Democrats could say it goes back before that as well. But he is saying, shame on you all. Here's your nominee. You're going to vote for her. She says this gentleman's qualified to be on the federal bench, even to be on the Supreme Court. So when some of us, Senator Graham's an open question, but his point essentially is when some of us vote against her, don't come yelling at us saying, oh, my gosh, she was qualified. How dare you?
Yeah.
Hey, Rick.
Go ahead.
But look, we also have to own up to something. The reality is Cheryl Watley, Eric Moyer, appointed to be federal judges out of North Texas. Republicans wouldn't even bring them up for the committee. They sat there for nearly 2.5 years. Democrats have done the exact same thing. The problem with this whole process is you have people who are placing holds on judges for no reason whatsoever. A lot of times have nothing to do with the nominee to score political points. That is what is bothersome in Washington, D.C. when they play these games on both sides. Democrats and Republicans, some great people, men, women, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, take your pick, have not been confirmed or even gotten a hearing solely because of politics.
I think Lindsey Graham would agree with Roland Martin, right? I think Lindsey Graham was saying today.
Point well taken, but I think the point that Lindsey Graham was making was, and I think as you read into this case and you go back to the Estrada case, it's the fact that that was a filibuster. In fact, it's described, as one of the first times that we've seen a filibuster against the majority with the nomination of an appeals court justice. I may be proven wrong, but that's why it stood out as it did.
He wasn't nominated for the Supreme Court. He was nominated for the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. There's also, I hate to complicate matters here with the facts a little bit, but Miguel Estrada was also not helped by the Bush administration, which refused to release certain documents that the Democrats said they would give him a vote if they released those documents. And I think it was unfair to Estrada, whose memorandum when he was working in the Solicitor General's office would have probably been very innocuous. The fact that the Bush administration didn't help him makes this story a little more complicated
don't go there
than it
because
is.
the Republicans, as you know, respect procedure, and they're not going to violate a basic procedure for anything.
I had a feeling that was good. Guys, we got to let it go.
But you know,
we got to let it go. We got to get a break in.
One good thing here, though, you got to see a contrast between Specter, been on that committee forever, who I thought treated her with disrespect, and I think that Lindsey Graham obviously rose above that. I think that's a good tone to set for the future.
Well said.
Good closing
elections
point. Have consequences.
Good closing point.
The bottom line is election. Yeah. Okay.
We'll let it go because we're out of time.